Hi, I'm rickdior, and you just heard page 40 from the Steve Houghton book, The Drumset Soloist. And that's a weather report style fusion solo. It's pretty intense. It's fast, it's about quarter note equals 160. Now this solo should start somewhat sparse rhythmically, but not energetically. So, in other words, you have to keep the energy up throughout the solo. So there I started with kind of a groove thing between the hi-hat, the kick drum, and the snare drum. And I moved to the toms, between the toms and the bass drum, getting more and more dense as I go along rhythmically. You heard lots of polyrhythms there. You heard some things in triplets, sixteenths, 30 seconds towards the end. So these are all devices that I talked about in the first video of this series. And these are things you want to use to build momentum. Now in this video, we're going to talk about how to develop some of the more dense or complex rhythms between the hands and the feet. But before we start doing that, you need to be able to play these rhythms as written accurately. And I'll put my hi-hat on quarter notes, and we'll just play through these rhythms. 1, 2, 3, 4. So where I did those rolls, those are longer notes. And a lot of times you're going to want to catch those with the cymbals, okay, something longer. You don't always need to hit a cymbal and a bass drum when you're playing these things. You could play them on the toms, or you could just leave out the figures altogether and play over them. And again, I did some of that in my demo. So you see the length there. That's important. So those short notes can be caught on the hi-hat or on the choked cymbal, or on a snare drum and bass drum. The longer notes can be caught on an open cymbal, a longer hi-hat, or lower toms. So in drumming terms, that's our way of phrasing with long and short sounds. And this solo has a lot of that. The ostinato does, in other words, the vamp. So when we try to catch figures between that, we can use, like I said in the first video, different rhythmic groupings. We can use triplets. That's almost a big band style of catching these figures. You can also use sixteenths. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's playing 16th and catching the figures. So that's the way you want to start out. Very simple. First thing is play the figures, memorize that for sure. You don't want to be reading that when you're doing it. So you have it in your head, so it's easier to manipulate different rhythms around that. And then play the different rhythmic groupings. Now, this is around 160, which is very fast. So when we have that tempo, you're going to need to break up some of those things so it doesn't sound monotonous. I'll give you a little version of that. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you saw there, I was playing just 16th notes and some triplets, using just those rhythms. Now, if we talk about doing this with the bass drum and the hands between them, you need to practice figures that work around those rhythms, okay? But the first thing you need to do is get the basic coordination. In my book, I have several pages of these, starting on pages 121, and I've been over this before in a few videos already on YouTube. We'll go over it briefly now. But on page 121, you have these rhythms like this. That's at the tempo of the track. So that's pretty fast. Of course, you want to start slower. And then once you get that, you want to play it around the drums. So that's a way of practicing that. And the next one, the one under the first, which is two-note groupings. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's at the tempo, once again, 160, and play it around the drums. And this whole section starts with 16ths, then we go to broken 16ths, like this. Now, some of these are going to be a little too fast to play with that track, but the triplet rhythms are perfect. So on page 124, we have these triplet rhythms. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's a perfect tempo for soloing. You see I'm playing between the hands and the feet around the drums. Now you can also mix up those rhythms. So on page 127, I have groupings of 16ths and triplets, which is very difficult. We'll start slow so you can hear that. Let's say 130. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm breaking up the group, 16ths, triplets between my hands. Now, when you do this, it's very, very important to use a metronome so you don't rush on those groupings. So you go through these kinds of things and you build a library. I call them stickings, but they're between the hands and the kick drum, all right? So that kind of coordination, just like you work on your rudiments, stickings, like paradiddles, you can do these things between the hands and the feet. And that's how you get some vocabulary for doing these kinds of things. So I'm going to play through the track one more time, and I won't go through the whole thing, but I'm just going to use some of these ideas. So there you see me playing those different groupings between the hands and the feet. And that's the way you should approach this kind of vocabulary after you get your hands going. And we talked about that part in the first video. So the next video, we're going to do an even more complicated one. We'll do it in the style of fusion swing, and it's fast. So we'll talk about licks to play for those kinds of solos. Thanks, and take care.